Chapter 1, Multidimensional Foundations of Methods for CLD Students. In this chapter, the mission is to explore cultural and social aspects of what CLDs bring to the classroom. You will be able to explain how to better prepare for these types of learners and the benefits that it will bring to your teaching. You'll be able to describe what teachers need to know about CLD learners in the classroom and how to differentiate between the asset perspective and the deficit perspective of a CLD student. In the end, you'll analyze the sociocultural dimensions of the CLD student biography and ways in which it influences the realities of teaching in such a diverse classroom. There are two major trends that we need to understand thus far that's going on in the American school system. One is that there's just a big increase in CLD students in the classroom. And then the second trend is there's a shortage of trained teachers to work with these types of students. Oftentimes, these students are no longer just located in the coastal states. They're not just, our island students. They're not just located in California, Florida, Texas, on the coastal states of the United States. They are now located pretty much everywhere. You see them inland states. You see them within the Midwestern states. Different situations have caused this over time, from chicken factories to plant factories to Hurricane Katrina. There are various kind of elements and powers that play out that have caused our classrooms to become significantly diverse. So now there's over 2.1 million CLD students across the world that have been in the classrooms over the last 10 years. By 2030, we'll have an increase of 40% of the classrooms as completely English language learners. And then there's over 400 languages already in the classroom. So what does that have to do with us? Well, there's now new demands on teacher preparation and in-service professional development programs. Now institutions need to add courses to their teacher preparation to better prepare future teachers with how to teach CLD learners. Hence, you are fortunate enough to have this course. Educators now need to have more support out in the field, more PD development courses, more PD development workshops need to focus on differentiated instruction and understanding how languages operate, and really just understanding the nuances of language acquisition. There's only 2.5% of teachers in the world who hold a CLD degree, whether it's bilingual or an ESL education degree. So again, the problem is teachers have little training or no training in how to differentiate the learning. Only 12.5% have had 8 or more hours of professional development. The point is that we need to be better prepared to teach such a learner. There are various acronyms that are broken down in Chapter 1. I would like for you to make sure you refer back to Table 1.1 in your book. I won't go through the acronyms in this presentation, but do look at them. And just know that over time we've moved from LEP, Limited English Proficiency, to LMS, Language Minority Proficiency, to mainstream, to now CLD. All of those were problematic. All of those had negative connotation. And now we want to use this CLD approach. We want to use that terminology. It's a holistic description of the learner. It looks at the learner holistically. It is a framework of the learner, and it is really a way to understand this type of learner, and I'll get more into it. But first, I want you to understand these two perceptions that teachers have out there about CLD learners. And one is the asset perception, and the other one is the deficit perception. Now, if you kind of view your CLD learners as a liability, then you're looking at them from the deficit perception. You're looking at them as the child or the learner who cannot speak English. They're going to be the ones that are the most difficult for you to reach. They're the students that you perceive as transient. They're the students that you perceive as, oh my goodness, they're going to bring my test scores down. I got to do something special for them. They're the students that you look at as, okay, I really don't want to have this type of learner in my classroom, but I'm going to kind of just do the best I can with them. You know, your whole perception and your whole expectations on them is extremely low. You think that they have deficiencies in the home. Whatever you perceive about these types of learners is basically negative. Their types of cultural nuances that they bring, whatever you perceive about these types of learners is basically negative. However, if you have the asset perception, then you're realizing that, wait a minute, these guys are multilingual. These guys are really diverse in linguistics. They bring a cultural experience to the classroom. They are contributors to the classroom. You see them as powerful. You see them as enriching the classroom. You see them as learners of the community as well. And you see them as assets, contributors, and everyone can learn from them immensely. Again, there's some acronyms, lots of them. Please refer to them in your table 1.1. We will go through these through our discussions, but if you just make sure you review them in their entirety, then you won't be lost when I throw them out in our conversation. So take a look at L1, L2, OCR, ICB. Just make sure you look at those. But let's go into the first dimension of a CLD learner. So the first dimension of a CLD learner is the sociocultural dimension. And this sociocultural dimension is the student's bio. It's the student's heritage. It's the student's language. It's the student's culture that she or he brings into the classroom. And your job is to really understand the social dimensions of the learner. When you do, you're making a point to wanting to connect with them. When you do, you're making a point to learn how you can draw in their own personal experiences into your preparation, into your planning, and into your lesson plans. That is the social cultural dimension. With every dimension that we'll look into, they come with challenges. Now, I want you to make sure you refer to table 1.1 of your book to list and see all the challenges that this dimension brings. Now, with this challenge, they have cultural challenges. They have to adjust to the new culture, to the town, to the city, to the school. They have to adjust to just recently being immigrants to their new location. They have to adapt to the new educational system. So for this reason, these challenges are really raw when they hit the ground running in a school system. They have psychosocial challenges. They have challenges that affect their psyche. They go through anxiety, they go through homesickness, they deal with anger and depression, they deal with structural input and environmental demands. All of this affects them emotionally. So they even deal with and go through psychosocial challenges. Again, these challenges fall under this social cultural dimension. And it's important for us as teachers to almost put ourselves in their shoes and have a lot of empathy for these students because of these challenges. Again, regarding these social-cultural dimensions and their challenges under psychosocial challenge, I'm actually referring to a table 1.2. They have intra-group challenges. Their language is broken. They've left their L1 and they're now being placed amongst this L2 environment. So there's a separation from their support system. There's a separation from their extended family members. There's intergroup challenges they have to deal with. They have to deal with prejudiceness. They have to deal with discrimination. And then to top it off, there's SES challenges. There's, income instability, family employment, access to health care or not access to health care, residency status. All of our learners behind the scenes are going through these various types of challenges. And why is this important for teachers? What does this have to do with us? What is the so what? Why should I care? We should care because we need to understand that in order for us to help them academically achieve, we must connect with them. And the way to connect with them, at least through this avenue, is understanding their dimension in a social cultural manner. So it's important to know how the school culture can really play a role in the learner's learning. We can make or break them. We can give them negative experiences or lots of positive experiences. The school culture serves as the gateway to how they're going to really perceive learning, perceive school. We really set the stage for how their attitudes should be. So it's counterproductive if the school forces norms and rules on them. It's counterproductive if there's just this big, strong emphasis on conformality, like you must do everything we do this way, the English way, the westernized way. And these ways could easily conflict with their culture, easily conflict with how they're used to learning from their homelands. So we have to be very careful. We can destroy their psyche if we are having a negative impact on them. And it begins with school culture. It begins with how the school perceives these types of learners to begin with. How they perceive the learners, how they perceive their families, how they perceive everything that they bring to that school. And so ultimately, if we have these different types of negative characteristics, then it can stimulate a lot of myths and misconceptions regarding these types of learners. So let's look at some of those. One myth is really to think that equity and education are in conflict. But they're not in conflict. It's understanding what equity is versus equality. And equality simply means that everything is equal. But in reality, learners are not all equal. They don't all come and start on the same platform. Everyone starts at different levels. Hence, we need equity. There's this kind of mentality out there. Well, I got mine, you get yours. Well, I have these opportunities, you have the same opportunities. That is just not true. Our learners do not all have the same opportunities. If that was the case, then we wouldn't have a lot of isms out here in the world. So equity and equality are not the same, and equity is not in conflict with education. What education has to own up to is that everyone starts on different playing fields, thus opportunities are not the same. Opportunities are not the same for various reasons. And that's a whole nother discussion. So it's a myth to think that, equity is a struggle or is always fighting against education. And it's not. What we have to do is provide equity in education. It's the fact that it's just not consistently there. Another myth is learning is due to innate abilities or natural abilities. Thus, CLDs, regardless of their culture and language, are capable of educational excellence. Well, that's just not true. Learning is not due to natural abilities. Learning is provided and is allowed to all. But learning, this myth is saying really that certain ethnicities have higher academic success than others. It really kind of secretly touches on IQ. Some people, air quotes, are inferior to other people, air quotes. This myth is really kind of supporting that CLD learners are inferior. Therefore, their curricular, their education is of substandard, and we should treat that as such. Not true. And if you fall into this category, you really shouldn't be in the classroom teaching. There's a myth that we treat all students the same. Not true. We have few instructional accommodations for CLD learners. There are a lot of teachers out there who do not use accommodations. For one, they don't understand accommodations. And then for two, they kind of feel like I shouldn't have to do it for 2 or 3 students when I have 26 students in the classroom. There's a myth out there that CLD students, not educators, are solely responsible for their linguistic challenges. Not true. We are responsible for their linguistic challenges. There's a distrust of native language when we use for instructional purposes. There are teachers out there who don't want to incorporate other languages for reasons that can stem from distrusting the language. There's a view out there that these learners will just get all confused if they still use their L1 while we're trying to teach them the L2. Not true. We'll look at theory of what it says about how your L1 can support your learning when learning L2. And again, the L2 in this case is English. Your L1 is your native language, the language you were born with. So review some of these myths and make sure you understand why they are as such. There's a myth out there that we recognize and value all the experiences that these learners bring into the classroom. Not true. If that was the case, we wouldn't have this deficit perspective floating around out there. There's a myth that we recognize these CLD students by allowing their cultures into the classroom. Not true. There are several incidents where students are forced to only speak English or don't talk at all. There are incidents where teachers are telling their learners, hey, no speaking Ilocano, only speak English. Even if they're just having basic communication skills, they're just off to the side chit-chatting with a common language friend. There's consequences to these myths out there. There's this big trust out there that schools have to deal with, that they don't respect and value the contributions of CLD learners. And it's here on the island too. A lot of this, I'm thinking, you guys might think, oh, well, that happens on the mainland. Well, I am out here in the field observing practicum teachers, student teachers, and I recognize it right away when I see a teacher unconsciously devaluing a student's language or culture based on what she or he says or doesn't say, or just how she or he interacts with that student. And then of course she's modeling it, he's modeling it, and your learners are going to emulate what you're doing in the classroom, and they're going to take this out into the world and treat not only their peers in the same manner, but people they meet out in the streets in the same manner. So the consequences of these myths are truly detrimental. I'm so passionate that I hope you all really understand. It's so detrimental. It leads to depressions. It leads to the learners wanting to skip school. You know, by the time they get to middle school and high school and they don't need to be dropped off, they're skipping school. They're not going to school. There's a big distrust, and it has to do with how they've been treated along the way. There's consequences that they're not rewarded, they're not acknowledged, they're not seen in the classroom. You know, they don't want to be seen. They don't want to perform at this point. They don't want to participate. They're afraid of being ridiculed and ostracized, all because of personal experiences of how they've had, you know, their schooling along the way. Their behavior shows it. It might be they're withdrawn, they are disruptive, they're resentful. So the consequences of these myths are traumatic. Because of those consequences due to the myths, I want us to really look at Krashen's 5 hypotheses. In resources in La Lima, there are videos you can watch that will break down the 5 hypotheses. Your book talks about input hypotheses and effective filter hypotheses. So I'll at least start with those 2, and I'll make sure I explain all 5 when we come together again. But when it comes to the input hypotheses, this is important for us to know, because with this hypothesis, it deals with comprehensible input. And comprehensible input is input that we as teachers must provide to our learners. It's giving them a little bit more information above their scope and sequence of what they currently know. Now we're talking about content. We're talking about language. We can talk about math, science, social studies. It doesn't matter the content. We're talking about how much do they currently know of this content, so that I can provide a little bit above what they know, the +1 information, so that they can gradually develop more of that content. Now, if you think of it as even starting with prior knowledge, you can't provide comprehensible input unless you know their prior knowledge. Otherwise, you don't know how much more to give the learner. It is just a little bit of info beyond what they can comprehend. So it's structured even. Again, I want you to refer to some videos that I have posted so that you can gradually kind of wrap this theory around your head here. If the input is understood, then there is enough of it, the necessary grammar will automatically be provided. See, what I want you to understand is when you're teaching language learners, the best way to teach them is through content. Don't worry about teaching the grammar. Don't worry about focusing on the descriptive, how to write the sentence, a subject plus a verb plus an object plus a period, capitalize the letter. Like all that scriptive will come the more you introduce them to the content that is in English. Comprehensible input is you providing a little bit more of information so that the learner can recognize that and continue to add on to the information. It is comprehensible. It's almost like scaffolding in a way with Vygotsky. And I'll show us visuals on this in our Zoom lessons so that you can really grapple with it. But refer to comprehensible input, and it's linked to the natural order hypothesis. Again, I'll go back on this slide. There are 5. And you start with acquisition learning hypothesis to monitor hypothesis to the natural order hypothesis. These hypotheses go in this order: first, second, third, fourth, fifth. When you have input hypothesis or comprehensible hypothesis, it's really going to determine how much the learner can learn. It's a continuum, these hypotheses. Comprehensible input is defined as the L2 input, the English, that's a little bit beyond the learner's current L2. If it's understood, again, there is enough for the learner to grasp. No need to worry about grammar. It will come. Here's what's important about the effective filter. If you have that comprehensible input and you're doing all of that as a teacher, that is great. But comprehensible input means absolutely nothing. It will not be successful if your effective filters is high. So let's look at this hypothesis. The effective filter hypothesis is how the learner allows that input in. That comprehensible input. Effective filters, just like a water filter, need to be open and allow the input in. However, if the effective filters are high, then learning will not occur. And what makes effective filters high is when their anxiety is high and their motivation is low and their self-esteem is low. You don't want high effective filters. You want low effective filters. When they are low, anxiety is low. Motivation is high. They have a strong self of confidence. They have a good image about learning this L2. They are excited. They have a good attitude about it. So again, school culture and the teacher and the community can really affect the effective filter hypothesis. We want to be the ones to affect the filter in a positive way. And if we do, the filter is low and it's nice and open, so comprehensible input can occur. So we have to be careful and not like dismiss the social cultural challenges that they come to school with. If we kind of just like dismiss them or minimize them, then we can do comprehensible input all day and we'll be wasting our time. Doesn't matter. We have to understand the processes that they go through when it comes to these challenges. We have to consider the stages of acculturation. And acculturation is being placed within a culture that is not of your own. Acculturation simply means it's a process of adjusting to a new or non-native culture. And the better way to understand the stages of acculturation, because it can be very painful for them, is for us to look at the U curve. So let's look at the U curve. This U curve really explains how your CLD learner can be anywhere on this curve at any given time. That first stage is the honeymoon stage. When they're at the honeymoon stage, it's just like if you've been dating a new person, everything is butterflies and exciting and fun and euphoric and, just gives you goosebumps. Well, that's how it is when you're kind of learning and being placed in a new language environment. You're enjoying all the novelties of this new culture. It's exciting, it's new, it's fun. And then you move to hostility. And then you realize, wait a minute, okay, this stuff is not that exciting anymore. This culture, like, I got to really adjust. Man, I'm getting frustrated. They don't understand me, or they're making me do this, or why do I have to do that, or this totally conflicts. Like, I don't understand. You start feeling angry. You start feeling threatened. You just want to disappear and go back to your home culture. You become hostile because whether you realize it or not, depending on the age and the maturation of the learner, there's a cultural mismatch. There's like subliminal and blatant cultural conflicts, and it's like, whoa, I don't know if I can really handle this. This is what the learner is feeling, and this is what the learner is going through. Then there's this humor stage. Once you get to the humor stage, it's okay, I'm a little bit past the hostility, right? I find kind of like some proactive ways to now manage and shape myself within this new culture. I'm reshaping my cultural identity. I am trying to adjust, and I have some new processes that I can practice with. I'm not as disappointed and frustrated. I'm a little bit more relaxed and tolerable. I know it's still not perfect, but I realize, okay, I got to put in some kind of like survival strategies here so that I can now, kind of live and function in this new cross-cultural life that I have. So this learner at this stage, they start to produce a better understanding of, okay, the norms and the values and beliefs of this new culture. And basically, they just learn how to cope with it and tolerate it. And again, kind of maneuver through it, whether it's psychological or physical or even spiritual. They learn how to synchronize themselves linguistically and culturally through this new kind of culture when they're in this stage. Then there's this home stage. It's when the learner can cross-culturally be sensitive to both perspectives. There's a respect with the new culture They don't give up their old culture. They still understand their old culture. They value the new culture and they celebrate it. They live in this bicultural world and they have this bilingual identity. Well, needless to say, when a learner is to this point, they are usually a full functioning adult. Our learners are going to go between honeymoon, hostility, and humor. Honeymoon, hostility, and humor. It takes a long time for them to reach this home stage. But when they do, they have full access to the repertoire and the cognitive meanings of social interaction and language of two worlds. They have a good grasp of native literacy, like that L2. They have a good grasp of second language culture understanding. At this stage, the home stage, they have self-esteem development, self-confident formation, social identity development. You have to be really mature at this level, right? So you can see why perhaps our learners aren't just there yet. Part of this is, you got to be here some years. You got to grow. You got to go through some things. You got to live life. They got to get to that adult stage, that pre-adult stage. They got to get to 17, 18, 19 years of age before they really kind of get to this stage. Because that's just a deeper understanding of intrapersonal, right? And oftentimes, even adults are still getting to understand themselves. So I'm just going to quickly sum up the so what, how come, why should we care about this whole chapter, and what does it have to do with us? I just want you all to be reflective in your understanding of CLD learners. I want you to understand that they come to the classroom as contributors. They come to the classroom with the ability to enhance the classroom. They're not liabilities. I don't want you to perceive them as liabilities. I don't want you to be frustrated and negative about these types of learners. I want you to understand that, okay, our instruction, my curriculum, and my resources must strategically and intentionally connect to who they are. And the more I know about their social cultural dimensions, the better I can do this. The more I can bring them into the learning and allow them to have academic success within the learning. I want you all to be able to make good decisions when it comes to how to pre-assess these learners. We'll look at ways to pre-assess them. What do they know thus far about this content? What do they understand about the roles of community service helpers? What do they understand about the recycling process? What do they understand thus far about single digit and two digit subtraction or addition, right? The more you pre-assess them, the more you'll have a better determination of what they know about the content. And then most importantly, you have to kind of pre-assess where they are on the U curve. Understand, you watch, you listen, you observe, you read their family history, you interact with their home givers, their parents, and you can assess their social cultural dimension. That's important so that you can see how you're going to impact their affective filter. You can see how their filter is thus far. Is it nice and open so learning can occur, that comprehensible input, or is it tight, restricted, and low? So it is important to understand your students and who they are and where they are. Have they recently immigrated to the United States? What's their cultural background? What's their prior schooling in their home country? How developed is their L1? Do they know their ABCs and colors and numbers in their L1, or do they not? All of that helps you with how to interact with them in the classroom? What's their family dynamics? Is their mother and father here, or are they here with their kapunas? Who's here? What network is here versus what network is at their home country? Understanding that path will really help you a lot with your learners. And then, of course, just understanding that prior knowledge of that content area, what's their writing skill level. So all of that is important, and that is why you should really consider who they are first. And that's why we kind of start with this dimension and understand the challenges that this dimension brings, but then understand how we can help get them through these challenges.